Great. So, hello everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on our speaker series. Today we have with us Vocational Rehabilitation and Hope Group. So they are going to be presenting some information about what Voc Rehab looks like. I just wanted to introduce myself. My name is Ceci Hartke. I am the Director of Programs. So again, thank you so much. You are welcome. We are excited to get some information going. I did want to point out some housekeeping. For those of you that didn't hear, we are all going to be on mute. So if you're not muted, please mute yourselves. During the presentation, we will be going through the slides. There will be a Q&A opportunity. So feel free to type in your questions as we go along. And when we get to that slide, I will go ahead and read your questions so that we can get those answers to you. So without further ado, I will go ahead and pass it on to, I think we'll begin with Janice. So Janice, if you could introduce yourself. Okay, you need to unmute.
I forgot.
That's okay.
Hi, everyone. I'm Janice Bradford. I'm the supervisor at the East Washington office. I've worked for Voc Rehab for 20 years. Welcome.
Thank you. Avery, would you like to introduce yourself? You could tap unmute.
Hi, my name is Avery. I'm a Voc Rehab counselor with the East Washington office. Janice is my supervisor. And I've been with VR for coming up on 3 years.
Hi, my name is Shelby Cairns. I'm the manager of state services for Hope Group. And just a little background on Hope Group. We've been providing services statewide for over 20 years. We do specialize in autism. Our main focus and always will be to restore hope during times of challenge and vulnerability for all of our clients. We have seen high demand and a lot of correspondence from families desperately needing resources and services for teens and adults. So we are proudly now providing VR services and growing with our families. So we're very happy to present with VR and this platform to share a little bit more about those services.
Hi, my name is Melissa Van Hook. I am the Vocational Rehabilitation Coordinator for Hope Group. Some of you maybe know me a little bit from the community before. I've worked with a lot of families out there and RSK families as well. I also vice chair the Arizona Developmental Disabilities Planning Council and chair their employment committee as well that does a number of projects around the state, specifically in employment. I have a huge passion for transition. I am also the mother of 2 sons with autism, a 16-year-old and 23-year-old. And my 23-year-old is currently working part-time and in school. So the issues that we're covering today are extremely close and personal. As a parent, I do understand it. So I'm so excited to have the opportunity after doing some consulting in this field to have moved over to work with Hope Group. So we're really, really pleased to partner with VR and share the information with you today. We hope you find it useful.
Well, thank you guys so much for joining us. I'll leave it to you, Avery.
So what is vocational rehabilitation, you might ask? VR is part of the Arizona Department of Economic Security, and we are administered by the Rehabilitation Services Administration. So VR is a program that assists people with disabilities in getting the skills and training that they need so they can overcome disability-related barriers to employment, find and keep jobs in the future, and also become more independent and self-sufficient. So vocational rehabilitation is a volunteer program, which means that in order for people with disabilities to benefit from our services, they have to want to work And when we do their intake and determine them eligible for the program, their eligibility for our program doesn't entitle them to any specific or particular services. So the services that we provide eligible individuals with are based on their employment goal as well as their individual disability-related barriers to employment. So all of the services that we provide are tailored to the individual, and we don't use a blanket approach when we're assisting our individuals with disabilities.
It's a partnership. Your vocational rehabilitation counselor and you as a client work as a partner to reach your employment goal and your self-sufficiency skills so you can be successfully employed.
And Voc Rehab is a public program. So again, we are administered by the Department of Economic Security, and pretty much every state in the union has a VR program. So it's federally mandated by the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, and then it was amended by the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act of 2014.
Oh, I think you missed one. Short-term or long-term?
Hold on. Oh, this is, sorry guys. It's blocking my screen. Okay. So VR services are designed to be short-term, but really it just depends on the employment goal or career goal that our clients have, as well as the specific disability-related barriers to employment that they present with. So a lot of times when we receive referrals for youth with disabilities, and these referrals might come from the high schools, we're working with teenagers who don't have any work experience, and maybe they don't have any volunteer experience either, and they might require more assistance than somebody who is maybe a little bit older and has some work experience under their belt, and maybe they just have some difficulties with specific work skills, or maybe they've had an increase in disability-related symptoms and they might not require extensive services. So really, it just depends on the person. So
All our, well, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to add that we can have people referred to us and they might be open with us for a year before we are able to help them find a job, and then we successfully close them, and we'll talk about that in a little while. And sometimes people come to us, and because of their employment goal and the significance of their disability-related barriers to employment, they might be open in VR services for a couple of years.
So the VR services can be short-term or it can be long-term. It depends on the needs of the client and their employment goal. So it can be both.
Okay, so like I had said, VR is part of the Department of Economic Security, much like Access or DDD, which is another thing that I'll talk about in a little while. So the difference between VR services and DDD services, the main point is that our services are specifically for people with disabilities who are interested in pursuing competitive integrated employment. So all of the services that we provide are to help with the pursuit of an employment goal and also address disability-related barriers to employment. Whereas DDD services, the desire to work and the ability to work isn't a requirement for DDD services. And They do also have some employment services, and sometimes those DDD employment services can be a good place to start for our individuals with disabilities. And also, when it comes to DDD services, they only have a certain number of qualifying diagnoses that they serve, and those are autism, intellectual disability, epilepsy, and cerebral palsy. I believe that's all of them. There might be a fifth, but when it comes to VR, we serve people with any disability, and that can range from any of those ones I just mentioned to maybe diabetes, or maybe somebody has renal failure and they're on dialysis a couple of times per week and they need help changing career fields or finding employment altogether. So we don't have, we can serve people with more types of disabilities than just developmental disabilities.
A lot of people get mixed up because we're all under the DES umbrella, but we're very different from the food stamps or access program, and we really don't have a connection with them. We're our own individual program within DES. And we do connect our clients to different resources within the community and other programs. And in fact, right now we do have a counselor from my office who works in the Arizona at Work location to promote the VR programs with the City of Phoenix, with employment specialists who work with the UI programs, with the veterans. So we have a large array of programs hitting different disabilities and needs of the community. And DDD, we have a new program that have started where we have, 5 within our county, within Maricopa County, of VR counselors who serve specifically the DDD population. And Avery is one of the designated counselors. And so he will have any clients referred to him from the DDD program to serve them with vocational rehabilitation.
And there's also a coordination of care and services between VR and DDD. So as a DDD VR counselor, I have communication with the support coordinator and also any other entities that might be involved with the person with the disability. So I mostly have clients who are between the ages of 18 and 24, though I do also serve some older individuals. But what we try and do is figure out what kinds of services the individual might be receiving from DDD, so that way we can complement those services and maybe just help reinforce some of the skills that the person might already be working on.
And within Voc Rehab, we do have specialty caseloads. We consider Avery's caseload a specialty, VR, DDD. We also have behavioral health services where we work with clients who are receiving seriously mentally ill services from the clinics. We have blind services, we have deaf services. Did I miss anybody's? Oh, TBI, traumatic brain injury services. Our office, I'll put a little plug. Our office is the only office that does have one independent living program to serve traumatic brain injury and cerebral palsy, and that's only for independent living.
It's TBI and spinal cord injury.
I'm sorry, what did I say?
CP. Yes, and
It's
so the independent living program doesn't require that the person have the desire to work or need the services in
No.
order to work. It's all independent.
And that's different from the regular independent living program that they have at Ability 360. This one, specifically, if you have a traumatic brain injury or a spinal cord injury, you can receive those services to become more independent.
So eligible individuals for VR have to have a documented disability, and the disability has to cause them to experience at least one of 7 functional limitations, or also we call them disability-related barriers to employment. So those 7 areas are in communication skills, interpersonal skills, self-direction, self-care and home care, mobility, work skills, and work tolerance. So if a person with a disability has difficulty in any 3 of those areas, they would be considered eligible in priority 1 category, which means that we would proceed with developing their individualized plan for employment, which is on another slide. So with the VR, we've operated on an order of selection, which means that there's a wait list for services for people who might only have 1 or 2 of those functional limitations, but currently the wait list is open. So even if they're determined to be eligible in priority 2 or 3 category, they might come off of that wait list pretty quickly.
I also want to add to the age. The age that you can apply for voc rehab services is 14 years and up. So if you're 14 years old, you can apply for services. I know there's been a lot of myths about that, but it is 14, and there's no age limit. So if you're 99 years old and you want to work, that's fine. We'll try to find you a job, and if you have a disability.
I have
Okay.
a question in the chat, Avery. Do you think it might be a good time to address it?
Go ahead.
Sure.
So it looks like Kin asked that her son has already done pre-eds, and he's at a level of independent working, but would rather maybe do well with the job coach, job duties that are routine and consistent. And is there a program where he would be able to do something and also helping with his social skills?
He sounds like he would be a good applicant for VR.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that you brought up those pre-employment transition services, or pre-eds. So those services consist of 5 different workshops, and they're designed for students with disabilities between the ages of 14 and 22. So they could be in high school, they could also be in post-secondary education or training. So in order to receive those services, the person has to be potentially eligible for VR, but they don't have to be referred to voc rehab or go through the eligibility process, or even go through the plan for employment or IPE planning process.
No, they don't. No, they don't. And let me correct you on that. If any kid that's in school that wants pre-ed services and has a disability can apply for that within the school, and they don't have to receive VR services.
So it's separate then. The pre-eds is separate from the VR.
It's separate, but it falls within a similar umbrella.
Yeah, it's kind of complicated, but if you have a child who's 14, 15, is in special education, they can go and apply for pre-ed services without the obligation of enrolling to voc rehab if they don't want to, but they can take those classes, and it's within the school. The school will give them the application, they can apply. They have job developers on the high school campuses that can help them. with that.
Yeah, and those services are provided by a multitude of vendors within Arizona. And some of those vendors will actually come to the school and provide the services to the students. Some of them might have the student go to their office to receive the service. And like I had said, there's 5 different workshops. So those workshops are in instruction and self-advocacy, work-based learning experiences, workplace readiness training, work exploration, and instruction on post-secondary education and training opportunities.
It's a great program. It's a great start for them to start thinking about careers and so forth. And then if they want to, after they take that, they can apply for voc rehab services. And we do have similar services too, but it's not called pre-eds.
But we can refer our youth with disabilities for pre-ed. So
Yes.
if a student comes to us and we do their intake eligibility, develop their IPE, we might recommend those services and include them in their IPE. But they can receive those services before coming to VR.
So they can eat either or.
Yep.
So it looks like your next bullet goes into her question. Ken asked again, so he can just go ahead and apply to VR through DDD. So I think that your next bullet point will answer that.
Yes. So a VR referral can be requested from the DDD support coordinator. It can also be requested from the job developer within the high school.
And
if
it can
your
just
son is
be,
in high school still.
yeah, and you can also just apply. At the end, we have a website where you can just get the referral and you can choose whatever office. Usually people go to the office nearest to their residence, but you can choose any office in, Arizona, in Phoenix, Arizona, and apply. And every application, they should not be, we cannot refuse any application.
And information on how to apply can be found on our website. And also on the website, you'll find resources such as the voc rehab orientation PowerPoint. It's a separate PowerPoint presentation about VR services. There's also some videos that explain VR, and you can also find things like voc rehab brochures.
So you can call in if you find an office, if you Google and you said, oh, VR office, and the office comes up, and you can call. You should be able to call any office, and they should be able to either give you directions to the nearest office, or they can just take your referral. My office does take the referral, and we do send it to their nearest location to their residents. So it's very easy to apply for services. You start with a referral, and then from there, when you do the intake and so forth, that's when they're going to ask for any documentation of your disability that you have to bring to the orientation intake. It's not a hard process to get services.
And if when people call the office, we take referrals over the phone.
Yeah. And if you want to even email, if you have, I mean, right now, especially everything is so virtual, you can email it to us. I'm interested in voc rehab. If you ever get someone's email that's with voc rehab, or you happen to get it, and so forth. Okay, I think we're finished with this one. We went over the wait list. I think we went over this. Except for eligibility.
Yeah, You don't have to use the VR office that's closest to where you live, though it's recommended, but it's not a requirement.
No.
So once a person sends a referral or we do the referral over the phone, what we do is we ask about what kinds of documentation they have of their disability. So like I had said before, if the referral comes from DDD, they send us a referral packet, which includes psychological information as well as the service plan, and it could also include behavioral health records and medical records. When we get referrals through other means, so such as if one of you was to call in and inquire about opening a VR case on behalf of your kid, then what we would do is we would ask you, do they also receive DDD services? Are they in high school? If they are in high school, can we send you a release of information so we can request the IEP from the school? Or if you were able to get those records yourself, or if you already have those, then what we would do is we'd schedule an intake and ask you to provide the documentation of disability at the VR intake. So after the VR intake and after we do the intake interview, we have up to 60 days to determine eligibility for the VR program. After somebody is determined eligible in the priority 1 category, we would meet again to start to develop the individualized plan for employment, or IPE.
Okay, so question in the chat, which I believe you just answered. A referral opens the process for being eligible for VR services, but not all referrals are approved, correct?
No,
No.
no. So when somebody is referred, that means that they're interested. So what we do is we schedule an intake, which is where somebody would officially open a VR case. They would officially apply for VR services. So after the intake is when we determine the person's eligibility for the program.
Based on the medical records in the interview.
Yeah.
And then after that, then you do the IPE plan, which is, towards your employment goal. And then that's when all the services begin, when the IPE plan is implemented.
Okay. So the individualized plan for employment, or IPE, is essentially the service plan for VR clients. So this is where we discuss an employment goal, and then we talk about intermediate objectives. So those are going to be the things the individual has to do or has to learn how to do before they can reach that employment goal. And then we also include client and family responsibilities in the VR process, as well as our responsibilities as voc rehab counselors. And then we also include services that will help the person overcome or circumvent or ameliorate their disability-related barriers to employment, obtain and maintain employment within their employment goal. And then we would also talk about further coordination. So that might, if the person has DDD services, then we would also involve DDD, because when somebody has DDD, if we provide them with services and then we help them get a job and we've provided them with retention services to help them keep the job. So again, that could be a job coach that meets with them on the job site, how many ever times per week is necessary. Once they start to become more independent after 90 days, at least 90 days, sometimes it could be up to 2 years depending on the person, but we would look at successfully closing their VR case. And if they have DDD or SMI services, we would look at getting them further job retention services provided by either one of those entities if they are eligible for those services.
Just remember, everything is based on the needs of the client and obtaining successful employment. So we try to meet all those needs, and it's a learning process as well as a partnership process where we're working with the client, and they have responsibilities as well as we do to make it a successful plan.
I do have a question in regards to this slide. This is from Elizabeth. She says, my son was assigned to someone with whom he wrote his goals, but she has since retired and I'm not sure how to get in touch with a new counselor. Could I go about it in the same way, or can I call the same office and someone can help me there? We haven't talked to anyone in over 7 months.
You can call the office and ask for the supervisor.
Okay.
Okay.
And then my other question is from Kay Clapp. If the student is still in high school, don't VR services start after graduation?
No, we start at
No.
14 and up.
Yeah, so it would depend on the specific service, but typically we provide services to students that are in high school.
Yeah, 14 and up. Because there's a big myth that we start after high school, but it's not. It's from 14 years old and up that we try to give them guidance, for career exploration and so forth, for them to meet their, dream job or their career.
Now, she added to this question, and I think this is a really good spot to clarify, because she puts in here, not in all districts. Some districts have VR classes. So can you guys kind of help us understand why these services are available from some high schools and not others? And
so, yeah, that's a great concern. So some of our school districts operate on a transition school to work, or TSW, contract with vocational rehabilitation. So that essentially just means that the school provides some funding towards the rehabilitation program for the student. And then there's a VR counselor that is co-located within that high school a certain number of times per week. And that is where those things like the different classes and campus-based programs come into play. So there are those opportunities depending on the school district. In our office, we aren't assigned to any TSW schools. Instead, we have what are called protocol schools. So those are going to be pretty much any other high school that doesn't have a TSW contract.
So if your son's school has a TSW contract and they want VR services, you can go to the nearest location and apply and receive services.
so this basically varies from district to district.
Yeah.
Okay.
Whether they have TSW or not.
Or not,
but,
yeah.
But just because a student goes to a TSW school, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to get into the TSW program, and maybe they don't want to be in the TSW program. So in those instances, they might be referred to a protocol VR office or counselor.
Or they can go to that office nearest to the resident, and they can open up their case.
Great. She's added, for seniors that have missed the September deadline, they then become protocol. Some districts have VR classes, or for the seniors who have missed the September deadline, they then become protocol. I'm guessing that this would be a question for the district.
I don't.
Well, then what happens is they might be referred as a protocol student. So then they wouldn't be in that TSW program, but they could still be provided with
Services.
the other VR services that they might need.
So even if they're not with the TSW program, they still can apply for services.
Thank you for answering those questions. I think we're okay to move on.
Okay.
Okay, so Voc Rehab can provide a multitude of services, And again, the services are based on the person's disability-related barriers to employment and their employment goal. And all of the services are designed to help them overcome some of those disability-related barriers to employment, reach their employment goal, and become more independent and self-sufficient. So
Go ahead.
And again, so this is just a list of some of the services that we can provide. And earlier I had mentioned that all of the services are tailored to the individual. So, and this comes as part of the individualized plan for employment, or IPE, planning process. So we can provide job search and placement assistance. We can provide job retention. We can provide services to help our individuals with disabilities develop transferable employment skills. And then we also provide all of our clients with vocational counseling and guidance. So that's something that I do directly. And what you'll find through this presentation is that a lot of our services are provided by vendors. So vocational counseling and guidance consists of me meeting with our clients to help them identify an employment goal. We identify the steps that they're going to need to take to reach that goal. We identify the services that they're going to need to receive. We also can provide benefits counseling and informational, info and referral services. I drew a blank there. Yeah, so if we have a client who needs something that we might not provide, we help them find that resource within the community.
And just remember that Voc Rehab is a learning process. That's when the clients come, it's for them to learn all these skills, not just to give them, but to help them learn so they can be self-sufficient.
Okay. So what you should expect out of VR services is services to help reach an employment goal, address disability-related barriers to employment, and become more self-sufficient. So VR services should be provided in a timely fashion. I did mention some of the timelines that we operate on. So after we receive the referral, we work to schedule the intake. If the individual has their documentation of disability, after the intake, we determine eligibility using information gathered at intake, and also by reviewing the documentation provided as well as our observation.
And on all of these, you should have great customer service from a vocational rehab office.
Yep, so you should expect regular contact from your VR counselor. They shouldn't be hard to get a hold of. So, and it's also it's a collaborative process. So as a VR counselor, I don't decide what my clients want or what services they're going to receive. It comes through informed choice and also the vocational counseling and guidance piece.
So you collaborate.
Yeah. Yeah, so we have equal part in the VR case.
We have our expertise to share with you in guiding you, but ultimately it is your choice.
And
it's your plan.
Yeah. And we have our own policy and procedures. So sometimes, unfortunately, clients make requests that are inappropriate or that are against policy. And in those instances, we have to play the bad guy and say no. And that's a whole nother process. But everything that we do comes from a place of trying to help our clients find and keep jobs and become more self-sufficient and just contributing members of society. And we also want to help our clients build their self-esteem and just really have a really high quality of life. So some of the services that we might provide are based on economic need, which means that depending on the amount of income that the client or the client's family has, that would dictate whether or not we would pay for a service they might need as part of their rehabilitation program. Though most of our services are not conditioned on economic need. So even if we had a referral for a client who came from a really well-to-do family, if they needed something like job search and placement assistance, that's not something that's conditioned on economic needs, so we would always pay for that if need be. And then, so the amount of time that a client receives services is just based on their level of engagement and also just their individual needs. So sometimes, for instance, I have a client participate in a work adjustment training. So the best way to think of that is like a job. So they have to go to a job every day. They're learning transferable skills that they'll need in any job, whether it's in an entry-level fast food job or whether it's an executive level job. Everybody pretty much still needs the same set of very fundamental skills.
And
so,
oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was going to add that it just depends on their level of need. So in a work adjustment training, somebody might receive that service for a month or two, and sometimes somebody might have high needs, but they're still making progress, so they might need to participate in that service for longer than that. So it's just based on the person.
And it also depends on your employment goal and what your employment goal is.
Yep. So sometimes we have referrals for clients who are interested in entry-level employment, and maybe later on down the line, they might come back to VR when we identified a career that they're interested in, or maybe right off the bat when they're referred to us in high school, they're interested in a career field, and maybe that career field requires post-secondary education or training, or they just need additional services to help them reach that goal. So in those events, that person might be open with VR for a couple of years.
So you can open and close a case. If your case closes successful or non-successful on that particular employment goal, you can always reopen in the future. There's no penalty.
Yeah, and I mean, and I think that kind of speaks to this slide here, but there is not a cap on the number of times somebody can apply for VR services in their lifetime.
I think we addressed this.
Yep. So responsibility of the client is to stay engaged and actively participate in services. And informed choice is we provide all of the information and the client decides whether it's something that's right for them or not.
And we give them all the guidance to help them make that informed choice.
So ending services with VR. So ideally, what we would like to see is for the client to come through VR, receive some services, receive some job search and placement assistance. After they start working, we can provide job retention services, which is where they would receive a job coach. and we would provide that for at least 90 days. So if after 90 days of them working, they're feeling pretty comfortable and they're at a level to where they can work independently without a job coach, then we would look at successfully closing their VR case. After successful VR case closure, if anything happens on the job within 1 year, so say they have new disability related symptoms or they have exacerbated symptoms, if they lose the job or if they're getting in trouble at work due to disability related needs, they can reopen the VR case that they recently closed out of. And again, it has to be within 1 year of successful case closure. So later on down the line, if they decide that they want to change career fields and they need some more services to address their disability, then they can open a new VR case and pursue a completely different employment goal if they'd like. And then when somebody closes unsuccessfully, so most frequently this happens due to loss of contact from the VR program. So if we can't get a hold of our clients or their family and we've exhausted all of our measures such as contacting emergency contacts, contacting case managers or support coordinators or whoever else might be involved with the client, we would send a 15-day closure letter and appeal rights. And then after 15 days, we would close the case. So when they're closed unsuccessful, they can always reopen with VR, but they would open a new VR case. So they would have to go through the intake and eligibility and planning process again.
And you can always reapply, and it takes as long as, I mean, the length of time to open that case depends on the medical documentation you bring. If you're a client before any updated, or they can, you know, use the same medical documentation if you're open before.
Yeah, and if a client doesn't have access to records, or if they or their family suspect they have a disability, but they just don't have documentation of it, if you're interested in VR services, we would do the intake and then refer you or the client for an assessment. So that might be a psychological evaluation or a medical evaluation.
And if you have to pay for your records, you've applied for services and you have to pay for your records, some medical institutions do that. We can pay for those medical records documenting your disability.
Okay, so the Client Assistance Program, or CAP program, which is also located in the same building as Raising Special Kids at Ability 360. It is a third-party advocacy service for VR clients. So if we have a client and maybe we as VR counselors aren't doing a good job of communicating with the client or the family, or if we aren't doing a good job of explaining the direction of the case, or maybe they might just be dissatisfied with the office or the particular VR counselor, they can contact the Client Assistance Program, and the Client Assistance Program might provide an advocate for the client and their VR case.
So that's a mediator, and it includes services also. If you're not satisfied with the services, or you want other services, they can mediate with your VR counselor and the supervisor.
Yeah, and like I had mentioned before, sometimes clients make requests and we have to say no. And in those events, we provide a written decision letter, which cites the VR policy as to why we are making the decision and denying a service or a request or an employment goal. And then what we do is after we write that decision letter, we send it in the mail with an appeal rights letter. So anytime a decision is made on the VR case, the client and the family, or the family, should receive a decision letter with appeal rights. So you have the opportunity to appeal a denial if you don't agree with it.
Or you can go to the CAP program and get a
Yep.
mediator. Okay, I think this is Hope Group.
Oh, hi, we're back. Yes, we are going to talk about things in Voc Rehab from the vendor side. Pretty obviously, what is a vendor? A vendor is a contracted agency to provide services for VR clients. A vendor is the same thing as a service provider. So you might hear us use the terms interchangeably. VR pays for the services. They pay us to provide the services to the client. Similar to DDD in that sometimes people get a little confused and they think that the VR counselor is the one that's going to do the job coaching for them. It doesn't work like that. Just like if you have DDD services or you're familiar with it, the DDD support coordinator works with the family and works with the client to help you find a vendor to give appropriate services like habilitation, speech, or occupational therapy, for example. And in our case, once a person is eligible for services, the VR counselor works to create that plan and then helps the client find an appropriate vendor that offers those services specifically. Not all vendors provide all VR services. There are many, many contracts for different services that Voc Rehab offers to clients. And so some vendors have multiple contracts and some only have a few for services. Some vendors also specialize in a unique demographic. For example, autism or hard of hearing or deaf. We specialize in autism. We do see people with multiple other disabilities as well, but autism has been a specialty of Hope Group for over 20 years. So the next one, what are the primary responsibilities of a vendor? Well, we have kind of a unique approach in that we really believe in a team approach here. And we believe it is really, really important to respect and guide the client to the goals designated in the IEP. That's what we're supposed to do. It's what we're hired to do. That individualized plan of employment that was created with the counselor. It is our job as a vendor to be very respectful of client choices and client goals and refer back to that, and that we work within that plan with the counselor on everything that we're doing with that client. It is the vendor's responsibility to provide the specific services that that client was authorized to receive from us. So we stay in close contact here with the vendor and with the counselor and with the client, and we receive an authorization for those specific services. And it is our job to make sure that we are doing exactly what came in that authorization, nothing more, nothing less, technically, within the scope of work of that contract. We work within the goals. So it is also our responsibility to provide option of Voc Rehab regarding the client progress. And then it's best practices that the vendor will also stay, as I said, constantly in contact. And if the client has a guardian, we also include them in the loop. That is part of who we talk to. If they have a guardian and they have signed off, they're part of all of the decisions that are made for that client, specifically with all of their goals. The difference between VR and vendor responsibility. So VR is responsible for starting the services for the client and determining the appropriate services depending on the client need. The vendor is responsible for implementing the services and working on those goals specifically. So just like your DDD support coordinator doesn't do speech therapy or habilitation, the VR counselor doesn't do job coaching skills that lead to good employment outcomes. That's our job. And then informed choice was talked a little bit earlier, but it is the client's right, this is from the vendor perspective, to choose the agency that they would like to use to receive services. So there are multiple vendors out here. We've talked about this. And we often get contacted by clients that are new to Voc Rehab. We will provide them with a referral form, but we always let them know in that conversation, while we would love to have them as a client, we explain that it is their choice to choose the vendor that fits them best. And they will make that decision with their Voc Rehab counselor. Finally, what can vendors do to ensure the best outcomes for the client? I talked about this a little bit earlier, but I'm going to touch on this again. We believe very strongly in a collaborative approach. One of the questions came up in the chat box that talked about that their counselor had retired 7 months prior and that they had not heard anything at all about that. Well, I don't know what the situation was or if that client was active and actively receiving services, but as a vendor, we have made it a priority that we stay in very close contact with all of the counselors for all of our clients. We require that all of our coaches send a weekly check-in email to the counselors for every one of their clients. So they're always in the loop. It's not long, it's just a touch base. And so if there's ongoing communication between the three parties, right? You've got the client, you've got the vendor, and then you've got the counselor. Everybody should be in communication on kind of a regular basis. While a vendor, that's our approach, Voc Rehab technically doesn't have to contact the client more than every 3 months. We just prefer to stay in close contact with both the vendor, both the client and the counselor. We don't get the outcomes if everybody isn't communicating. That's a big deal. Communication is huge. Communication on our part with the family, with the client, with the counselor. It's also a big deal on the part of the client. The client has an obligation to reach out and stay in touch. If they haven't heard from their vendor, if they're having trouble with their vendor, they need to let their VR counselor know. If they haven't been in touch with their VR counselor and cannot get a response from them, they need to pursue going up the chain of command and talking to a supervisor or emailing. And if the counselor is doing everything they're supposed to and is calling the client, emailing the client, doing their due diligence, it is absolutely the client's responsibility to calls and emails in a timely manner. I know VR gets blamed a lot for things when they don't go well. The vendors do too sometimes, but that third party client matters just as much. And DDD, as a parent, I know is very good about reaching out to us and will pursue us multiple times. Voc Rehab is not the same thing. It is a volunteer program, just like Avery said earlier, and people need to reach out and own that part of it if they want to be in it, because there's some great things that can happen. A couple more things. We need to be fit the client's needs and not the other way around. It is not our job to put them in, say, a working situation that they've said, I don't want to go wash cars. I want to be here. It's not the right thing for a vendor to push a client somewhere they want to go simply because it's convenient for us. We don't do that. Listening to the client's choice and respecting the decisions that were made regarding individualized and vocational goals and that IPE, that plan, by the counselor and the client, we need to respect that. It's not up to us to change that. But if there's input, we have an open conversation with the client and the counselor involved. And if there's a guardian, we discuss that as well. And then that's kind of where we're at with this. So I think I'm going to turn it over to Shelby.
Hello. I know we're a little bit of a time crunch, but I did just want to touch base on any changes from the vendor perspective due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Of course, this was a case-by-case approach. Most families did want to go virtual with services. That's a wonderful option through vocational rehabilitation is virtual services. So virtual meaning WebEx, Skype, even phone calls. We have been quite successful in maintaining service outcomes and client goals through virtual options. We were really happy, actually, some clients did get jobs even during the COVID-19 pandemic. So we definitely want families to know that there is a virtual option for services. There's absolutely job opportunities still during the pandemic. So just wanted to touch base on that because I know it's been a really unpredictable and kind of scary time for families. So we also are more than happy to address any questions. I know we have a question answer towards the end, but just to touch base on how does this change services in the future? So we would love to continue, long-term with virtual options, especially for rural areas. We do know there's a lot of people that are in need of services and they're in those rural areas or are not quite comfortable leaving the house yet. So once again, we're absolutely adapting to this new world, and I really can say virtual services have been a success. And I know there's also a lot of valuable resources out there. I know Melissa has been a part of some web series that provide a lot of virtual coaching options and ideas, which we've utilized and have been very, very helpful. So if anyone is interested in learning more about those third-party resources and you know, how it can adapt into your virtual services, please know that we're here to help with that.
We're happy to answer questions. One of the good things that has come out of COVID, one of the few good things, is that there have been a number of great webinars put on by the UCETS, University Centers for Excellence in Developmental Disabilities. We have 2 of those in the state of Arizona, one of them at ASU and the other one down at the U of A. And they do a lot with disabilities. But they have put on a number of webinars. There have been disability organizations across the country that have talked specifically about how to deliver services in these times. And out of those have come a lot of great tools. So if you're working on budgeting goals or financial goals, that can be part of somebody's independence if they have to manage money in order to have their job. There's goals that people work on that can keep them from being successfully employed, can be an impediment. So there are a lot of tools online that we can work with our clients on. And we have learned from other states, interestingly enough, that are very, very rural. And because of their demographics and the way their geography is, they've had to use virtual services for a lot of years. Those states have stepped up and shared things, and that's been very interesting. And what we have thought about at Hope Group, Shelby and I in particular have discussed the fact that we think that with a lot of these, we can now reach out and work with a lot more clients that are further away because we have virtual services. So I think VR, I'm going to address the next slide. If you'll go to that, Avery, please. I think the biggest difference, and you guys can let me know if this is true, is that services for you guys, your meetings, your client service planning meetings, a lot of those meetings that would normally be face-to-face at your office are now done by phone. And then
Yes,
the other
it's all
thing, how
virtual.
does this, yes, ma'am. And then how about how does this change services long-term, Janice?
It doesn't, it depends what your plan is. So it really
Yeah.
doesn't change your services because you already have a plan towards your employment goal. So it's the same services, it's just more virtual.
And it just depends on the selected vendor and what services they're providing and how they're providing those services.
Yeah.
Okay. And if anybody has other questions on that, we can answer, and I'm sure they can get in touch with you as well.
Yes.
Yeah, so
Absolutely. The contact information's on the next slide, so that's definitely an opportunity to, you know, email Melissa and I if there's any questions about virtual services, how they're delivered. We're more than happy to just share information. We're not gonna, you know, keep that to ourselves. We want people to be informed and know options.
Thank you so much for sharing all that information with us. I don't believe we have any additional questions from the chat. Actually, there was an additional one. Does the outcome have doesn't the outcome have to be realistically achievable? For example, if a client who has primary reading levels and they want to become a doctor, would the employment plan be to become a doctor?
So that's part of the vocational counseling and guidance process, is helping clients identify realistic goals.
And another question, can you share information on webinars at UA and ASU?
Yes, actually, it was U of A and NAU. I can get the links and I will share them with Raising Special Kids, and they can be posted. Ceci, can you guys put them to your site or at least in this chat at some point?
Yeah, absolutely. We have a list of everyone who had registered for this training, so we will definitely share the contact information with you all and any additional information that Hope Group has to offer and VR has to offer. I want to thank everyone for taking the time to come out and listen to this great information. Thank you all I think we answered some questions. I think it's kind of exciting that this virtual world has allowed us to continue to do this. And I love the Raising Special Kids always gets phone calls, especially rural communities, about services and just different opportunities that just seem to be more difficult. So it's really exciting that you guys are doing these things in a rural and at this virtual capacity. So thank you all for what you do.
It's my hope it expands. I hope that vendors and VR across the state will look at doing it that we can actually begin to service those outlying areas a little better and underserved communities.
Silver lining in all of this, coronavirus stuff, right? Wonderful.
Yep.
Yeah, we've been kind of forced to take this on, but it's been a really awesome challenge, honestly. Yeah, I'm very happy with some of the outcomes we've had with our clients through virtual services. So thank you so much for your time, Ceci, too.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Thank you guys
thank you.
for coming out. Well, we'll see you soon. Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye,
Thank you,
everybody.
everybody.
Bye.